When students feel like they've made a mistake and they've done something wrong, and they feel like all the doors are shut in front of them, then they have no options, really, there's no value in the conversations anymore. There's no value in looking at you as a leader who's going to serve them. In every given disciplinary situation, there has to be something, some way for a student to feel there's a path forward. And if we as educators aren't providing that in a very clear manner to the students, it robs us as the educators of the opportunity that each disciplinary situation presents, an opportunity to lead, serve, and teach through. The important side of that is making sure that there's a path forward. Hey teachers, welcome to the Lead, Serve, Teach podcast, where we explore the intersection of leadership, education, and personal growth. I'm your host, D. Paul Miller, and I'm so glad you've joined me here for a little real talk and some powerful conversation. You know, just recently I finished up a 3-part series in this podcast on discipline. And, I was inspired to give one extra episode, a bonus episode, if you will. And it's really going to be focused on tools and what I call tools over trouble. They're really just practical strategies to handle discipline with grace in your classroom, in your hallways, in your school, anywhere that disciplinary situations happen, and become a much more effective teacher, much more effective educator, much more effective administrator when it comes to discipline. So sit back, relax, and just take these for what they're worth. Some of them you probably heard of, some of them you may use, and some of them maybe new ideas, and may just spark something in you that's going to encourage you and something that you can maybe even change tomorrow in your classroom and make it a better place for your students to learn, to move forward, to become better human beings, which at the end of the day, that's our goal, to get them to that point of being amazing human beings. One of the most amazing people I've met in my life is a man named Bill Schoffenhauer. Some people may be familiar with him, some maybe not as familiar, but he's just an amazing individual. Some people today know him as Bill Schoffenhauer, the businessman, Bill Schoffenhauer, the CEO of tech companies and different things. Some people know him as Bill Schoffenhauer, the former Olympian. As I've gotten to know Bill over the years, it's just fantastic to hear more and more of his story and where he came from. A lot of people, again, see him in this successful light as the tech industry guy, or they see him in this very successful light as wow, man, an Olympian, an Olympic silver medalist in the bobsled. Wow, what an amazing guy. First one to help Team USA win a silver medal in 40 some odd years or something like that in the bobsled. Just an amazing individual. But to actually go back in time and hear parts of his story, some of them are gut-wrenching. Some of them, hearing parts of his story about his childhood, growing up on the streets of Salt Lake City, Utah, living in less than ideal situations, moments where he's growing up in the midst of drug and alcohol abuse with his mom. And it was just a gut-wrenching story. And, you sit back sometime and you hear these stories. How did they find success in the midst of such disruption, such chaos? And, it's amazing. I've had the opportunity to actually speak with Bill and develop a friendship with him. And it was amazing to me when I started asking him, Bill, your childhood, you're going through these terrible things and things that a child shouldn't have to go through. How did you change your stars? He likes to say that really you can be a champion by design. One of his great statements that he has. And, he believes that you do get to really write the book of your life. And, I started asking, when he started talking about that, I asked him, it's like, Bill, where did you realize that you could change your stars from being a child of the streets, if you will, to being someone that gets into the Olympics, someone that stands on the Olympic podium? What changed for you, Bill? What happened? And without fail, Bill always points back to teachers. He points back by name those specific teachers in his life that believed in him, that supported him. And Bill will be the first to tell you he was not the most excellent student. Bill will tell you and be honest that, he had a lot of discipline issues. He had issues, run-ins with the law. He had run-ins, again, with himself with dealing with drugs and alcohol and things that he shouldn't have been involved with. And yet, time and time again, he points back to moments where teachers supported him. Teachers got him involved in sports. Coaches surrounded him when, he didn't have a family to surround him. He had his teachers and his coaches that continued to believe in him, continued to support him, in many cases, providing disciplinary methods that were actually for his benefit, disciplinary methods that provided him a path forward. So using this idea that teachers can come around and really help to be that catalyst to change someone's stars, to help a kid like Bill Schoffenhauer go from the streets, living on the streets of Salt Lake City, Utah, to standing at the top of an Olympic podium, receiving a silver medal in spite of all odds, against all odds. He's there receiving this medal. He's there even after that time frame, stepping into the tech industry and becoming C-level executives with these different businesses and going on to write books and become a great speaker, one of Jack Canfield's personal coaches that he has. And such an amazing, amazing story. And again, it all comes back to that pivotal moments in his life where teachers and coaches made all the difference. And many times they were making the difference in the midst of disciplinary situations. First thing I want to do is just encourage you today. The first tool I want to give you is something very simple, and it's a mindset. And it's something I mentioned already a couple of times in previous episodes. It's just this idea that every disciplinary situation is an opportunity to lead, serve, and teach. So that's something on the front end. That's the place we need to start in our mind, in our mindset. That's where we need to start. But then after that, well, we kind of need to get to some tangible tools. So I'm going to be giving you some of those tangible tools as we're developing, as you as teachers are developing that mindset of how do I lead, serve, and teach through this disciplinary issue, through this event that has happened. As we're developing that, you also need those tools to pull out of the tool belt and use. And that's why I'm here today, to give you those tools. One of the first tools I want to encourage you to use as a teacher is a relationship builder. Again, being in administration as I am now, sometimes I ask those students that get in trouble, and I ask, why did you do this? Why did you get into this situation? Why did you make this mistake? And of course, they'll may or may not have an answer for why they did it. But then I often ask them, well, why weren't you listening to your teacher? And then the interruption happens, and they tell me about the teacher. They tell me that the teacher doesn't care for them. The teacher doesn't know me. One of my personal favorites there. I do have to sit back and say, one, student's just being a student. They're learning how to be a human being, and they're just angry. They're letting the emotions get the best of them, etc. But sometimes I do have to sit back and say, I've seen those moments where those students that are problems on our campus, the students that get into trouble a lot, sometimes there's random people on a school campus that unequivocally, 100%, that student will listen to. And almost 100% of the time, that one or two or three people that they will absolutely listen to on that campus are the people that have taken the time to develop a relationship with those students. And so I want to encourage you to be that person on your campus for all of the students in your classes. Sometimes if I'm speaking to elementary teachers out there, you may only have 18, 20, 25 students that you come into contact with a day. Whereas a high school teacher, you may be coming into contact with 150 to 200 students in your classes. And I just want to encourage you, no matter how many students you're coming into contact with, start figuring out a way to build relationship with your students every single day. You've heard me talk about my tool that I used every single day in every single class, and that was Life Lesson with Mr. Miller. A moment where I took maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes, start of class, just to tell them funny stories about what I did, mistakes I had made, something from my life. Sometimes it was stories from other people's lives that I would share, and it was just a moment to connect with them. It was something that was, as I would say, anything but school. Sometimes our students need a moment to shut down that academic brain, especially if they've been going through 6 or 7 periods of classes every single day, academic topic. Taking a moment to do anything but school for just a few minutes and really having that focused on building relationship, building connection between you as the leader in the classroom and those students. It's amazing how that can actually totally turn the disciplinary situations on their head. Some research has shown that just taking a few minutes a day, to build relationship with the students, to do anything but school, as I say, it can actually decrease disruptive behavior by up to 85%. And that's just within your classroom, just in the four walls of your classroom, not to mention the impact that it has exponentially outside of your classroom. And so I encourage you, first tool is something that is, I guess you could say, proactive rather than reactive. And it's taking the time every single day, every single class to build relationship, doing something non-academic, but in a roundabout way, it is academic because it's going to set the foundation for your teaching later. But it's non-academic, anything but school. We're going to talk to our students about real life, whatever it looks like for you. I encourage you to build something into your day, even if it's just 2 or 3 minutes at the start of class. Or sometimes when I talk about building this life lesson moment, sometimes teachers say, well, wait, I always start my class with a bell ringer. And of course, it's academic, right? And so I encourage them to not change their process. I say, listen, maybe you still start with this bell ringer that's an academic topic and it's going to flow into your lesson and what you're doing. That's great. Maybe your life lesson happens at the end of class. Maybe your life lesson happens in between that bell ringer and the start of the lesson. Whatever it is, choose today to go ahead and set up some time to be proactive in building relationship with your students, to build connection, to support them, to let them know that you are a real person, that you're fallible, that you make mistakes, that you made mistakes in the past. One of the best ways we can convince our students to engage with us and to let us pour into their life, both in academic and non-academic ways, is to show them that we are real people, that we made mistakes, and that we've learned from them. We have to model that for our students, just like we would model our thinking. In Algebra 1, for example, if you're sitting there working this math problem and you want to show the students, hey, as the expert in the room in math, this is how I would be thinking if I saw a problem like this. This is how I would go ahead and solve it. This is how I would maybe check my answer. This is how I would test my hypothesis. Whatever it is, you use those I statements to model your thinking as the expert in that academic area. I think it's just as important to sometimes step back and model for our students and telling them the story of how we messed up, how we made mistakes, and how we came back from them, how we learned from them. So when a disciplinary situation happens, and they will happen, it opens the door for that student to be willing to listen to you because you've already modeled the fact that mistakes happen and there's a correct way to handle them. There's a proper way to learn from them and make those, in fact, very valuable moments in your life. So again, first tool I want to give you is just the relationship builder. However it looks in your classroom, whatever it looks like, just make sure that it's happening. Let it happen every single day. And you never know, you may have the next Bill Schoffenhauer in your class that maybe doesn't have the best home situation. Maybe needs teachers and coaches to come around and support them to be the family, to be the motivation, to be the one that puts them from a life on the streets to a life on the Olympic podium and finding great success. So I encourage you, make relationship building, whatever it looks like, make it a part of your daily routine in your classroom. The next tool I want to give you is something that probably many of you are familiar with, but maybe it's not used that often. And that's class culture contracts. You know, one of the most important things we can do is establish the what, why, and how of the lesson. And in reality, what I'm talking about with that is literally talking about what this lesson is going to be, what this lesson is going to be about, what the skill is going to be. But then that second item in there, the what, why, and how, the why of a lesson. When you establish the why behind an academic lesson, well, in reality, what you're doing is you're really bringing the students into the reason for that lesson. Most of the time when I don't tell my students the why for the lesson. I know the why behind I know why it's important. But in fact, I just simply sit back and ask questions. I ask questions of the students that are pre-planned. I know the questions that I'm going to be asking because I want to elicit from them the ideas for why the lesson is important. I want them actually to develop their own why for the lesson. And I think that's somewhere we really need to start in our classrooms with developing a why behind a classroom culture. This probably starts on day 1, 2, or 3 of the class. This is where we are establishing classroom norms, classroom procedures. And in reality, it's going to be so important to not just tell our students, this is why we have these things in place, but to bring them into the process themselves to discuss the why behind our classroom procedures, behind our classroom expectations, and let them start developing some of those for themselves. So I think one of the most important things, again, in a proactive mindset of maybe how do I stop discipline situations before they even happen, is to develop classroom culture contracts. And these are really where the students themselves come up with the rules that they kind of want to live by in your classroom that are going to lead them to success, that are going to lead them to learning in your classroom. And so when it's amazing the difference that happens when your students are the ones, in fact, saying, this is how I want to live in this classroom. This is how I want to operate in this classroom in order to achieve success. And then, in fact, I always would get out a big sheet of paper and have these written on. Sometimes it's poster board. And then I'd have all the students sign their name to it like it's a contract. And it's amazing how you could take that and paste that on the wall rather than I'm not going to trash classroom rule. Hey, here's my 1, 2, and 3, my classroom non-negotiable rules. Sometimes teachers still have that, and they also have the class culture contract because it's so important when you have a disciplinary situation and you can just point to, hey, back here on the wall, there's this contract that you signed. And you said you wanted to operate. You said this is important, and you wanted to operate by X, Y, and Z expectations. It's amazing how that changes the conversation with students when they're off track. And so that's the second tool I want to give you. Both of these tools, the relationship builder, the classroom culture contracts, you could say that they're really proactive. They're kind of getting in front of, the disciplinary situations that we know are going to happen. It's kind of getting in front of them and making sure that we're kind of building a foundation that, one, is going to support learning in the classroom, but is also going to support us when the disciplinary situations happen. It's going to support us in making sure that we can lead, serve, and teach our students through those moments. And I think that's in reality what happened for Bill Schoffenhauer over and over again in many classrooms throughout many years, as he found teachers that maybe innately understood this idea that every disciplinary situation is an opportunity. So the last thing I want to leave you with, the third thing, is just some questions. You've heard me talk a lot about questions and how it's a great place to start with learning. Many educators out there, you probably heard of the high-level thinking questions. In reality, it's pretty simple idea, right? That the higher level question you ask, typically the higher level response you get from the students. I know it's not always 100% accurate with that, but the idea is still there. If you ask a low-level question, you can definitely guarantee you're probably going to get a low-level response. If you want a high-level response from your student, ask high-level questions. And if you want to go look up Bloom's taxonomy and different things like that, compare it to the questions that should be asked, please do go and do that. I'm not going to spend my time there because really today's lesson, again, is just a bonus session for discipline. It's really focused on tools that you can use in those disciplinary moments. And what I want to give you right now are some, they're simple questions, but they're really high level questions that you can ask in high stress disciplinary moments. And what I've found over the years is really the tone that you have and the questions that you ask, they can really bridge the gap between the conflict and connection, really, that you need to be successful to provide a path forward for your students. So I'm going to give you 3 simple questions today that you kind of need to go ahead and practice. Put them in the back of the brain there, put them in the filing cabinet. And when that disciplinary event happens, 1, if you've been building relationship in your classroom, built that foundation, it's going to be an easier bridge between the conflict and the connection that you need. If you've already been using those moments to talk about mistakes that you made in your life and how you've come back from those mistakes, how you found success in spite of those, etc., you've already put in the back of the brain of your students that, there's going to be a path forward and I need to be looking for that. If you've already got a classroom contract that the student themselves, they signed their name to it and they told you why it was important to have these expectations in your class, you can also use that to leverage this conversation. And at the same time, starting with questions helps you get a wider perspective of the situation. And really, these questions can be a moment of de-escalation. Sometimes we ask questions, I think, in disciplinary situations that maybe increase the stress of the moment. And these are just three simple questions that you can use to de-escalate, to gather information, and to really help you as the leader in that classroom serve your student and get to the outcome that is both positive for them, positive for you, and leads to a teaching opportunity. One of those first questions that you can ask is very simple. And it's just looking at that student and say, what do you need right now to feel okay? Seems very simple. Seems almost too simple in many ways. But this question kind of signals that you care for the student. You want to help them in that moment. You're not judging them. It gives the student permission to kind of name their feelings, if you will, and express their needs. And it kind of provides a little bit of space in that moment. It opens up the moment for you to listen and for the student to feel that they have a space to speak. So I encourage you to put that question in the back of the brain, put it in the filing cabinet, and when the disciplinary situation happens, reach back into that file, pull out that, hey, what do you need right now to feel okay? Sometimes I think students, when I've used this question, it can be a moment of confusion for the student. They're really not expecting this kind of question. And it totally changes the dynamic of the classroom when you're asking a question like that. Sometimes in a very heated situation, maybe another question you can use is, hey, can we press the pause button and come back to this in a few moments? This question really diffuses the intensity of the moment while keeping the door open for a resolution. The door is open for a path forward. And so it doesn't feel like the student's just being shoved to the side because they're a discipline issue. Now it's saying, hey, let's take a breather. Let's pause for a moment. And can we come back to this in a few minutes? Sometimes it's where that pivotal moment where you ask that student, hey, come out in the hallway and talk to me for a second. One, it's amazing what happens when you take that student from out in front of an audience in the classroom and just one-on-one in the hallway where you keep your foot in the door and listen to what's happening in the classroom for a moment or two. Make sure that you're giving the other student a specific task or something like that. But just it gives you just a few minutes to talk to that student out from in front of everybody. And it's amazing how that diffuses the intensity of the moment. The third question, when you ask this question, it's kind of like it's hard for the brain to compute what was just asked because it's not what they're expecting. It's what do you want the rest of today to look like? A lot of times I've found students when I ask, hey, what do you want the rest of today to look like after this mistake, after this moment, after this disciplinary pop-up that's happened here? What do you want the rest of today to look like? And it's interesting how a future-oriented thinking question like this, it kind of invites ownership of their decisions. It invites the student to take ownership of their decisions. It opens the door for you to show that actually you're on their side. You're rooting for a good outcome for them. And it encourages reflection and redirects that energy towards a next better step. It points them towards the path forward. When students feel like they've made a mistake and they've done something wrong and they feel like all the doors are shut in front of them, they feel like all the doors are being closed and they have no options, really, there's no value in the conversations anymore. There's no value in looking at you as a leader who's going to serve them. There's no value in it anymore. I think in every given disciplinary situation, there has to be something, some way for a student to feel there's a path forward. And if we as educators aren't providing that in a very clear manner to the students, it robs us as the educators of the opportunity that each disciplinary situation presents, an opportunity to lead, serve, and teach through. But it's only going to happen when we make sure that the student in question or students in question, those students that may have all come together and caused this issue and made the mistakes together or made it singularly as a single student, it's really in the important side of that is making sure that there's a path forward. And that's really what allows us to lead with grace, to actually work with these tools and practical strategies so that we can handle discipline with grace. The grace that I'm talking about in this moment is always, always, always ensuring that we're opening the door to our students to walk through in a path forward, to actually have a positive outcome, no matter how negative the situation was, no matter how negative the disciplinary event was, that we are still offering a path forward for that student. And when the student sees that from the get-go, from the beginning moment. Maybe it just starts with a simple question again of, what do you want the rest of today to look like? It shows the student that we're on their side. We're rooting for them. We want a positive outcome from this. And there's a path forward. There's a door that's open in front of them. It's amazing how when we present that first, it changes the dynamic of the room. It changes the conversation that we're having with the student because they can see clearly there's a path forward. There is something good on the other end of this. There's something I'm going to learn. And yeah, there may still be consequences that are going to happen for that student. There's still code of conduct issues and things that will come into play, but they also see that there are people that are surrounding them, just like the people many years ago that surrounded Bill Schoffenhauer and helped him change his stars from the kid of the streets, a kid involved with discipline, a kid that's messed up, a kid that made mistakes, to a man that has found success, a man that stood on a podium for the Olympics, receiving his silver medal, a man that has changed the lives of so many other people now. It's because teachers came around him in disciplinary situations and showed him that they were there to support him through building the relationships, but also allowing him to take ownership of his mistakes and understand what he did wrong, but always providing grace, always providing that path forward for those students. And so I want to encourage you to, again, use the tools that I've given you today. Use some of the proactive tools like relationship building and making sure that's a part of every single class, every single day. Make sure that you are implementing class culture contracts. You could do it at the beginning of the year. That's the best time to do it, but you could do it any time of year. If you don't have them implemented right now, you can use them. You can take them and create it tomorrow. Spend a day on it. It's worth it to spend a day on creating the class culture that you want, that you know will lead to success for the students. It's important any time of year, not just the beginning part of the year. So use those proactive tools to help you when the disciplinary situations pop up. Use the proactive tools. Go ahead and start planning for the future, if you will, and for the successful outcomes when distractions, when mistakes are made. You know that you've already built the foundation for successful outcomes. And then in the moment, take those questions I just gave you. Some of them are mind-altering for the student. Some of them can diffuse a situation, and some of them really help the student see the path forward. What do you need right now to feel okay? Can we press pause and come back to this in a few minutes? What do you want the rest of today to look like? So simple, yet so mind-altering for the student, and really gets us to that positive outcome that we're hoping to have in every situation, every disciplinary situation. It's an opportunity to lead, serve, and teach your students. Thanks for joining me here today. Again, I'm D. Paul Miller. I'm so glad that you joined me. And remember, you're not just a teacher, you're a change maker. So keep striving, keep inspiring, and don't quit. You got this.